Hi, I'm Greg Uland with Reynolds, and this is Connected. We are at the NADA show in New Orleans. Right now, I get to sit down with Ken Hill. Ken is the managing director at 700 Credit. Ken, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, looking forward to
Appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think, gosh, it's been a few years ago, but you were on with me. It was probably at least 2 or 3 years ago. We did a remote session.
Yeah. We were talking about pre-qualification and where it's integrated within the Reynolds systems.
Yeah, for sure. Well, today I wanted to start, Ken, just talking about the topic of fraud kind of in general, and then we can dig a little deeper. But at first, thinking about fraud, and obviously there's a lot of different types that you can probably go into exquisite detail on. But how are dealers, what are some common ways, at least in today's world, you're seeing dealers be hurt by various types of fraud?
Oh, theft, right? Walking out of the dealership, going for a test drive, never coming back. Synthetic fraud is on the rise. I think 2 years ago it was an $8 billion problem, and it's probably tripled since then. Synthetic fraud is where a fraudster makes up a synthetic identity by creating a credit file with filling out a credit app online, and that creates a credit file. And then they build on that credit. Authorized user are added. They pay a consumer. I don't know if you ever used authorized users before. I use them for my kids to build their credit. So they'll pay a fraudster, or they'll pay a good person to add that fraudster profile as an authorized user, so it inherits all the credit. And then they continue to build that credit over 2 years. And the problem that our industry is facing is that they're working towards the bust out. And the bust out is when they walk away from all that debt. They'll max their credit cards, and the last thing they'll do before the bust out is they'll buy vehicles, right? And then they walk away. So Unfortunately for our industry, we're their target. And these are organized fraud rings, right? It's just not one guy in a shop, although it could be. Right, it's typically a fraud ring of 5 or 6 people, and then they'll not, some of them that have been caught, there's 4 or 5 vehicles in a lot that they have stolen that day and walk away. So fraud is definitely on the rise, and I think we did a survey, and it was I think it was 40% experience more than 2 vehicles stolen a month.
Really?
Yeah.
I must just be naive, because that seems just crazy to me.
Yeah.
Yep. Wow.
Yeah.
So, and again, just probably lack of education on my part, so I might ask some stupid questions if I do.
That's
I apologize. Right. But I think of a vehicle, right? A vehicle's got a VIN.
Yep.
A vehicle's going to be registered with the state.
Yep.
Everything's kind of tracked. So how do people get away with this, right? And then you think about the world that we're in today and how connected vehicles are.
Yep.
Right. And a lot of cases, you can pull up the vehicle on an app and see exactly where it's at.
Yeah.
So how do people get away with this in today's world?
Cut shops or freight containers, right? There was a dealership in Pennsylvania. I think it was a Lamborghini dealer. And a couple walked into the dealership and took off with 2 Lamborghinis. Gone. I took them out for a test drive, never came back. And they were they caught them at the seaport loading a container ship on a ship with the Lamborghinis inside the container.
Really?
Oh, man. That's a story I hear a lot, right?
Yeah.
They put them on containers and ship them overseas.
Man. So do you see, I assume stories like that happen more on the edges of the country, right, towards the coasts?
Well, the container stores,
right.
Yes, but theft is not. Yeah, it's not isolated to one area.
Yeah. So what are some other examples? I'm trying to wrap my head around.
What are they doing with these cars?
Right? Yeah. How does why? And a vehicle is obviously something that's very expensive, very valuable. So I understand that aspect of it. But what do you do with the car? It's not like you're just going to drive it around town, right?
No, well, you take it to a cut shop, right?
Okay.
Where you break it all down, sell off all the parts.
Okay.
Right. All the parts don't have VIN numbers.
Sure.
So there are a lot of things you can do, and they know where the VIN numbers are, right, on the vehicles.
Yeah. Okay. So talk to me more then about synthetic fraud. You mentioned 2 years. Why is 2 years the magic number, or is it? I mean, maybe
it takes a while to build your credit, right? You can't go out and apply for 10 credit cards today, right? So it takes, first of all, when they add that fraudster as an authorized user, they inherit the payment patterns of the credit card that the consumer is paying, right? So it takes a while for that credit score to, right now I can apply for another credit card. It takes a while for that credit. I'm trying to build several lines of credit, right? In most cases, we've seen like 750,000, I think is the average price for a synthetic fraudster of how much they walk away with, right? And then I max out my credit lines and make that big purchase at the end of that bust out. So it takes time. They're patient, which is the scary part.
Right. Yeah. So then what happens? So a dealership sells a vehicle to somebody who's committing fraud, right? So that paper that they sold it, the paper that they sold to the bank is obviously not worth anything. So then does basically the bank then reject that if they catch it in time, or where's that responsibility
That's
lie?
the big, I think, who's responsible, right? In some situations, the lender's responsible, and in most situations, the dealer is responsible. Now, larger dealer groups can, they have a little bit more leverage with the lenders, but certainly smaller dealership, they don't, right? So they're on the hook for that. Most of the time, the dealer's on the hook.
Man, it's unbelievable. So obviously, there's processes that everybody has in place. There's some regulations that are there to also help protect the dealer and everybody else. So talk about some of those things. I know, we were chatting before we started recording about ID verification and things like that. So share a little bit about what you're doing at 700 Credit in that world.
Sure. Well, we've had a couple of webinars, and actually last year in NADA, we did a show with the 3 credit bureaus and their analytics experts on how to detect synthetic fraud. And so there's the models that you can add to your credit report that look for that synthetic behavior. It's a synthetic scorecard. But also the takeaway was, how to fight this. It's get to know your customer. And the best way to fight fraud is to capture the driver's license and authenticate it as early as you can in the process. So you're raising your level of protection, right? If you just do it in the finance office, you're exposed all the way to the finance office to that fraudster. But if you do it at the beginning of the process, you're protected. But driver's license authentication, right? We just finished our integration with Reynolds. That can be integrated with, you can initiate a driver's license scan from within Reynolds. Then all the images are placed in the digital deal jacket. But authenticating the license is your best wall of defense.
Yeah. What other steps are there? What other things can you do, or even what other things are you required to do to help prevent this type of stuff too?
To prevent
fraud and things like that.
Yeah. The synthetic fraud score, driver's license verification, dealerships are required to do red flag. Those are all things that help prevent. There's other types of verification, right? You can always ask out of wallet questions. There's geo-based questions now that are also available. So there's several things dealers can do, but I would say the most important is to, dealers are capturing licenses anyways today.
Right.
When they capture the license, authenticate it.
Yeah.
Right.
So how do you, as a dealer, because this stuff can be scary, right? And if it happens to you or it happens to somebody nearby, somebody that your defenses are going to go up, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do this stuff in a way that doesn't feel accusatory, right?
Yeah.
And then also,
we're adding friction to the process. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, right, dealers, there's another benefit to, capturing the driver's license is that dealers are required to safeguard consumers' information. That safeguard regulation that went into place last year. And one of the best or the points of weakness inside of dealership is they're required to capture images of the driver's license. How are they doing that today? Right? They're making photocopies of licenses. putting them in a paper deal jacket or scanning that photocopy and manually dropping it in the deal jacket. I purchased a car at the end of last year, and the sales rep wanted me to text him a front and back image of my driver's license, right? That's not too safe. That's not safeguarding consumer information.
Right.
Paper, making photocopies of driver's license is going away. So the faster you can get ahead of the curve, the better. So when I'm making a copy of that driver's license, I have to do that anyways. So with our driver's license scanner, you can send a link to the consumer. They take a front and back picture of their own. It's nothing to install on the consumer's phone. It's a web service. They take a selfie, and that validates the driver's license against the state specifications for each state. We compare the selfie to the image on the front of the driver's license. We compare the information on the front to the back. We run some, we do synthetic fraud checks on that. We do a public record database. And we also do a DMV lookup, right? And then we take those images and we place them in the Reynolds deal jacket. So you're sort of two birds with one stone, right? You're adding that layer of fraud protection, and you're also safeguarding that consumer information, because that's really the biggest point of exposure, is how dealers are capturing licenses and how they're storing them, right? Because they have to store them. So take inventory of what's happening in your dealership around your driver's license capture.
Yeah.
So, and that's to answer to your question, that rabbit hole to your question, right? You asked, how do you make it feel non-invasive, right? And that's incorporate the process. And I think it's a better experience for the consumer, right? I'm not handing my license to someone and they're walking in the back room with it, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Right. So it's a better experience for the consumer. I think it makes for a better workflow.
Yeah. Talk to me about that selfie technology, because I'm thinking, right, a dealership or a driver's license is good usually for 4 years, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And for some people, they can look a lot different in 4 years, right? Depending on the phase of life that they're in.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't have as much hair in 4 years.
It's all
right?
in here, right?
Okay.
It's all in here. Your eyes. I don't know if you use Clear at the airport.
I don't.
Right. It's an optic, right? And it's from back here. It's an optic scan.
Yeah.
And it can pull up your file. But that's important because they're in that selfie. And when we compare it to the image on the front of the license, there's also a liveliness detection, right? What some fraudsters will do is they'll steal an identity, right? And they're working a deal remotely. They'll send images of a driver's license, like they'll steal somebody's driver's license. They'll send images of the license, and then they'll take a picture of the person that's on the front of the license and submit that as their selfie.
Sure.
Right. So that's that liveliness detection piece. That it's not a picture of a picture. This is a selfie. Right.
Yeah.
So that's the important piece. And you would be surprised at the selfie comparison to the driver's license and what matches. Right?
Yeah.
We have a couple of stories that the guy was like, "There's no way that's going to match," and I matched because it person changed their look, colored their hair,
right,
earrings, tattoos. And it matched. So, yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. And it is pretty cool technology, right? When you can do that facial recognition picture, match it up to a selfie, like that's impressive.
Yeah. As much as we can do. The DMV is, I think, too, right? Because it should match, right? So you're putting all these points of verification together, right? The liveliness, the image on the driver's license, information on the front. Is it out there in a public record? Does it match? It should match 100%. Right?
Yeah.
And a couple of things that we're coming out with, right? A true false if it's an active license, right? Or suspended, or, and then we're also, the DMV, EMVA, they're going to do their own image verification. So, make sure that the image that we submitted on, to them on the license is what they have on file, because that's another thing fraudsters will do. They'll affix an image on a license.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit, Ken, too, about the compliance piece of this. So
Sure.
How do you make sure it gets done every single time, right? And then how do you prove it if you ever need to?
Right. Reynolds has a stopgap, right? I think they call it stop deal. You can stop a deal until that's performed.
Okay.
Right. You can stop a deal in Reynolds until an OFAC is. You can stop a deal until a red flag is run, right, and passed.
Yeah.
So that sort of gives dealers some insurance that these things are happening, and all those things go in the deal jacket, right? So now I have an audit report that I can run that shows this is everybody that bought a car, and these are all the things that I did. And you typically, when they do an audit, they'll ask for certain consumers' deal jackets, right? And go in, and I can bring up the deal jacket and display it.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So just having everything really, I mean, what I took away from that was go all electronic on everything. So it's there, it's documented, and you can make sure to pull it up whenever you need it.
Yes. Right. For an audit. Yep.
Yeah.
And the reporting is a critical component too.
That's
right?
true.
So I can summarize, this is what I've done. Where do you want to dig in? Right. And then they'll dig in.
Yep.
And they'll see, okay, and they'll dig in a couple more, a much faster audit than, oh, wait, you got an issue here. Let's look a little bit deeper and more expansive. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so Ken, what haven't we talked about that we should? Anything I haven't asked you that I should have?
Well, I think we talked about safeguarding consumer information and getting driver's licenses, safeguarding consumer information, getting that in the deal jacket. But there are other important pieces of information that should be in the deal jacket. I know that we've expanded on within Reynolds. Right, no matter where the dealer's pulling red flag, Route 1, external system, or in Reynolds, we can get that information in the deal jacket. The risk-based pricing notice, we can get that into the deal jacket, right? If your dealership has a deal sign or DocuPad, we can make that risk-based pricing notice part of the signing ceremony, whether they pull the credit in Dealer Track, Route 1, or in Reynolds, wherever they're pulling credit, we can get that, right? So getting that information in a deal jacket is important, and eliminating the printing, right? Do some audits of what you're printing, where is consumer information in my dealership, and how do I electronicize it and get it in the deal jacket and not laying around on the customer's desk.
Yeah, love it. Love it. All right, well, Ken, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
Taking time. I hope you have a good rest of your show, but
appreciate
appreciate you taking time with me.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.